What happens when someone's perfect life turns into a nightmare in a matter of minutes? This is the reality for John, a young reporter who seemed to have it all: a promising career at the largest TV network in the US, a romantic relationship with his colleague Jessica, and the support of an adoptive family that loved him unconditionally. However, this stability is shaken when a police sketch of a thief terrorizing women in the city is released, and to everyone's horror, it looks exactly like John. The story follows John, a charismatic and dedicated reporter who has always dreamed of making a difference through journalism. He grew up in a loving home after being adopted, and this happy childhood shaped his positive character and determination. However, this ideal life begins to crumble when, during a live broadcast, he is fired and arrested under the allegation of being the criminal terrorizing the city. Confusion and indignation take over him as he struggles to understand how this could be happening. What was once a dream transforms into a haunting nightmare. As he fights to clear his name, John discovers that the woman who identified him provided a detailed description of his face. This leads him to question his own identity and seek answers in a past he thought was resolved. He eventually learns that he has a twin brother, Michael, from whom he was separated at adoption and who has lived a life full of difficulties and resentments. Michael, in turn, has become a thief, and his anger is directed at the world that rejected him, especially the women who reminded him of his mother. The scenario becomes even more complicated when John discovers that his biological mother, Susan, was the one who reported Michael to the police, intending to protect John. This revelation further shakes his beliefs about family and love, and the search for answers leads him to confront not only his brother but also the mother he never knew. As he gets closer to his truth, John realizes that he needs to face the traumas of the past to find a path to the future. The environment in which he finds himself is hostile and challenging. The suspicious gazes of people on the street, the sensationalist headlines bearing his name, and the pressure of his career at stake create a constant atmosphere of tension. John finds himself fighting to regain his honor and the trust of the people he loves while facing the consequences of a crime he did not commit. In this emotional turmoil, John connects with his vulnerability and begins to reflect on what truly matters in his life. He realizes that success and fame are not everything and that true happiness may lie in the relationships he builds, not in appearances. Through interactions with Jessica, his colleague and love interest, and with people he meets on his journey, John starts to understand the importance of forgiveness, reconciliation, and unconditional love. The path to overcoming his challenges is not easy, but he is determined to face them and find new meaning in his life. The chaos that had settled in John's life was palpable. At first, he felt paralyzed, as if a storm had swept away everything he considered safe and certain. After his arrest, he was released on bail, but the feeling of being trapped in a web of lies and misunderstandings constantly accompanied him. The accusing stares of people on the street, the distrust in the eyes of acquaintances and strangers weighed heavily on his heart. Jessica, his colleague and girlfriend, tried to be the support pillar that John so desperately needed. But even she was in conflict. While she believed in John's innocence, she could not ignore what everyone was saying. The pressure from the media and the possibility of her career being ruined were burdens that affected their relationship. During a tense conversation, Jessica vented, "John, I want to believe in you, but the truth is that the situation is unsustainable. People are talking and I don't know what to do." That statement cut through John like a knife, and he realized that his struggle was not only against the accusations but also against the doubt that was beginning to settle in the mind of the woman he loved. As he tried to find a way to clear his name, John decided to investigate who could have made such an accurate description of him. This search led him to an unexpected encounter with Detective Ramirez, a police officer in charge of the case. The detective was a man of few words, but his expression showed that he was also skeptical about John's story. "You have to understand, kid, that the evidence is not in your favor. What you have to say may not be enough." John's frustration grew, for he felt that no matter how hard he tried to explain himself, no one was willing to listen. Distrust hung over him like a shadow, and he began to feel isolated. Amidst all this, John received an anonymous message on his phone. The message suggested he seek out Michael, his twin brother. Initially, he hesitated. How could he connect with someone he didn't know and who, according to the information he had discovered, was involved in criminal activities? But the idea of finding someone who might have the answers he so desperately needed became irresistible. The possibility of understanding his origins and, perhaps, finding an ally motivated him to move forward. When he met Michael in a dark, poorly lit alley, John felt a mix of fear and hope. The brother was everything he was not. Michael's anger and frustration were evident. "Do you think you know what it's like to live in a world that doesn't want you, that abandons you? You were welcomed, but I was left behind." Those words echoed in John's heart, which had never considered what his brother had gone through. He realized that for Michael, he represented everything he had never had. This instant connection led them to an emotional confrontation, where each exposed their wounds and resentments. What should have been a reconciliatory meeting turned into a verbal battle. John tried to explain the situation, but Michael was not willing to listen. John's frustration grew with each passing moment. He felt powerless and began to question whether he could truly change the course of his life. The idea that his identity was linked to someone so dark left him in conflict. What did that mean for his own story? What did he really know about himself? At this point, John realized he needed more than just answers. He needed inner strength to confront not only his brother but also his own issues. The pressure of the success and fame he had always sought now seemed insignificant against the emotional challenge he faced. What did he truly want? The search for a truth that perhaps would not be what he expected. This new perspective made him reflect on his life, his career, and the relationships he considered important. As he fought against the challenges life threw at him, John realized he could not make this journey alone. His friendship with Jessica, though tested, was still a light in the darkness. Her support, even amidst uncertainties, was what he needed to keep going. Together, they would have to face not only the external obstacles but also the internal ones that threatened to destroy everything they had built. This was the true battle, and he was determined to fight for it. John walked away from Michael with a knot in his stomach and his head full of questions. The meeting had not gone as he had hoped. Instead of finding an ally, he faced a brother who harbored deep resentments. Michael's anger hit him like a storm, and now John didn't know how to deal with it. He felt frustrated, lost in a maze of conflicting emotions. He had never considered what his brother had truly gone through, and this made him reflect on his own life. The pressure was mounting. With each passing day, more headlines emerged regarding the accusations against him. The media seemed to feed off his suffering, and the feeling of being watched followed him like a shadow. He knew he needed to clear his name, but with every attempt, the evidence seemed to pile up against him. Even with Jessica by his side, the external pressure became unbearable. She was becoming increasingly distant, dealing with her own insecurities. The conversations that used to be comforting were now filled with awkward silences. One night, while trying to distract himself with a movie, Michael's message echoed in his mind. "You were embraced, but I was left behind." The words resonated, making him feel guilty for having a life that, in many ways, seemed perfect. He had achieved what many dreamed of, but now everything felt fragile. The pursuit of success and recognition seemed like a trap. He wondered if it was worth continuing to fight for something that, deep down, made him so unhappy. During a visit to a lawyer's office, John heard devastating news. The evidence that surfaced not only linked him to the crime but also indirectly implicated Jessica. The thought that she could be dragged into this mess terrified him. He knew he had to protect Jessica, but how could he do that if he was in trouble himself? The lawyer, a serious and pragmatic man, looked at him with an expression that mixed compassion and skepticism. "You need to think of a plan, John. We don't have time to waste." The lawyer's words echoed in his mind, but the pressure to act only heightened his anxiety. The nights became long and restless. John often found himself awake, thinking of Michael and how their lives had taken such different paths. He remembered childhood moments he had forgotten, when the two were inseparable. In adolescence, everything changed. While Michael succumbed to bad choices, John sought success. Now, he wondered if he had left his brother behind without even realizing it. The internal conflict consumed him. The need to prove himself not only to the world but also to himself became a heavy burden. One night, John decided he needed to talk to Jessica. He found her in a cafe, where the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the soft sound of voices. He watched her for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Jessica, I don't want you to be dragged into this. This situation is destroying me, and I don't want you to carry this weight too." She looked into his eyes, the pain evident in her gaze. "John, I won't let you go through this alone. I'm here, but I need to know that you're fighting for us too." The intensity of that moment made John's heart tighten. He realized that despite the difficulties, Jessica still believed in him. That gave him a new drive. He decided he wouldn't let himself be defeated. He needed to find answers, but he also had to confront his own demons. The encounter with Michael had left him shattered, but it had also awakened something in him. He now knew he needed to face his brother again, not just to seek answers, but to establish an understanding. In the days that followed, John began to devise a plan. He knew the situation was complicated and that to defend himself, he needed to know the truth about his brother. The idea of a final confrontation terrified him, but he was determined. The weight of guilt and responsibility for Michael's life followed him, and he knew it was time to confront it. The journey to the truth was just beginning, and the twists at every step made John's life increasingly intense. What he sought was not just absolution, but a true understanding of what it meant to be part of a family. As he prepared for the next meeting with Michael, he felt that the battle was not just against the mistakes of the past, but also against the fear of what the future might hold. John sat at his desk, papers scattered around him like a storm of information that made no sense. He had spent days trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed impossible. The evidence against him was heavy, but the feeling that something deeper was at play troubled him even more. The meeting with Michael had been a turning point, but the reality that Jessica was also in danger forced him to act with greater urgency. It was on a cloudy afternoon that the turning point occurred. An unexpected call interrupted his thoughts. It was an unknown number, but something compelled him to answer. The voice on the other end was familiar, but the message it brought was devastating. "John, you need to hear this. I learned something that could change everything." John's heart raced. The person on the line was willing to reveal information that could not only help clear his name but also dismantle what had become a web of lies. "I have proof that someone is manipulating the evidence against you. Someone close. And I'm sure this is linked to your brother." The words penetrated John's mind like a lightning bolt. The idea that Michael could be involved in some way left him paralyzed. He had never considered this possibility. What else did he not know about his brother? The revelation shook his certainties. He had always believed that the greatest challenge would be facing the media and the accusations, but now he found himself confronted with an even darker truth. Fear and anger began to intertwine in his chest as he tried to process the idea that Michael, the brother he had always wanted to protect, might have a role in this story. The guilt of having distanced himself from him now turned into a new anguish. How could he have been so blind? The conversation with the informant ended, leaving a bitter taste in John's mouth. He knew he had to confront Michael, but the thought of doing so now was frightening. What would he say? How could he explain that in a moment of pain, he had distanced himself and now needed the truth from him? The urgency of the situation forced him to act. He had no more time to waste. That same night, he steeled himself and decided to look for his brother. The tension was palpable as he drove to the neighborhood where Michael lived. Memories from childhood flooded his mind, moments when they were inseparable before life drove them apart. The tightness in his heart grew with every kilometer traveled. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew he had to try. When he arrived at Michael's door, he hesitated. The fear of a new explosion of anger paralyzed him for a moment. But the thought that Jessica's life was at stake made him knock on the door. Michael answered, his face carrying a mix of surprise and disdain. "What do you want, John?" The tone was cold, and the look was challenging. "We need to talk. It's about the accusations and what's really going on." The tension was palpable. John saw Michael's expression change, a mixture of confusion and distrust. He had never been so direct, but the urgency forced him to be. "You don't know anything, brother. It's always been like this. You think you're better than everyone else, that you can just come back whenever you want." Michael's words cut like blades, but John didn't back down. "It's not about that, Michael. I found out that someone is manipulating the evidence, and it might be linked to you." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael frowned, anger giving way to doubt. "You think I'm behind this? I'm the victim here, John." His frustration was evident, but John saw an opportunity. "Then tell me the truth. What happened between us? Why did you pull away and let me believe everything was fine?" The conversation turned into an emotional battlefield. Revelations began to emerge, open wounds that had never been treated. Michael spoke about resentment, about how he felt abandoned while John achieved success. John, in turn, laid bare his own pains, his insecurities. The tension between them slowly dissipated, giving way to an understanding that both needed. But a new reality imposed itself. The truth they discovered together made John reconsider everything he thought about success and happiness. He realized he had measured his worth by external achievements, forgetting that what truly mattered were the bonds that united them. The conversation became a turning point not only in their relationship but also in how John viewed life. He no longer wanted to be just a successful man. He wanted to be a brother, a partner, someone who fought for those he loved. The weight of his past failures was still present, but now there was a light at the end of the tunnel. As they left Michael's house, both were changed. What had once seemed a solitary battle was now becoming a shared journey. John knew the challenges weren't resolved, but he also knew that together they could face them. Life had tested them, but now it was time to start anew. Night fell quickly after the intense conversation between John and Michael. The exchanged words still echoed in John's mind as he drove back home. He felt a new weight in his heart, but also a lightness. The revelation that his brother was not the enemy, but rather an ally, had completely changed his perspective. However, this change didn't erase the difficulties that still lay ahead. Upon arriving home, John couldn't relax. He sat on the couch, his eyes fixed on the walls that now seemed a little emptier. What to do next? The urgency of the moment still pulsed in his chest. He knew he needed to uncover the truth about the manipulations that were happening, but the thought of confronting the person behind it made him anxious. What was going through Michael's mind? How could they together unravel this plot? The next morning, John decided he couldn't wait any longer. He dressed quickly and set out in search of answers. He knew he needed to connect with the source who had alerted him about the manipulations. Anxiety accompanied him as he drove toward the cafe where they had met last time. The sunlight, which once seemed so bright, now felt like a reflection of doubts. When he arrived at the cafe, he spotted the familiar figure of his informant already at the table, a worried look on his face. "You seem more at ease," the man said, but John sensed an underlying tension in his voice. "I talked to my brother," John replied, trying to stay calm. "But that doesn't change the fact that we're still in danger." The conversation flowed between them, but with every word, John felt the shadow of fear creeping closer. The source explained that there was a group working to incriminate him, and they were willing to do anything to achieve that. "You need to protect yourself, John. They won't stop until they're satisfied," the man said, with a serious look. His words hit him like a punch to the gut. He knew his life was at stake, but now the lives of Michael and Jessica were at risk too. As they talked, John remembered Jessica, the woman he loved who was in danger because of this situation. He couldn't leave her vulnerable. The thought of her propelled him to act. He needed to find out who was behind the accusations and, more importantly, protect those he loved. After the conversation, he decided to meet with Jessica. Upon seeing her, his heart raced. She looked so beautiful, but at the same time, there was a worry in her eyes that made him uneasy. John took a deep breath, trying to gather the right words. He was trying to resolve everything. He had talked to Michael. He wasn't the enemy, but they needed to be careful. Jessica looked at him, confusion blending with hope. "So what can we do?" The tone of her voice conveyed a determination that made John feel he wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they began to plan. John explained everything he had discovered and how he could finally confront those who were manipulating the evidence. But now, there was a new challenge, the need to gather proof. In the following days, John dedicated himself to investigating. He and Jessica spent hours in libraries and online, trying to piece together information that could help them. With each clue found, the adrenaline surged. However, fear also grew. They knew they were stirring up a hornet's nest and could become the next target. What had started as a quest for justice was turning into a race against time. One night, while reviewing documents, John felt the weight of the pressure. "What if we don't succeed?" he asked, his voice trembling. Jessica, who was beside him, held his hand. "We will make it, John. We're in this together. You're not alone." That simple affirmation brought unexpected comfort. He realized that despite the obstacles, he had people beside him who cared about him. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. John faced new challenges, such as people trying to destabilize him and the constant fear of retaliation. But instead of letting insecurity take over, he remembered the conversation with Michael. The connection they had established encouraged him. He was determined to clear his name and protect those he loved. Meanwhile, the relationship between John and Michael also grew stronger. They began working together, sharing information and strategies. Michael, who had always been impulsive, now showed a maturity that John hadn't known he had. Together, they became a force to be reckoned with. Each day, John felt stronger and more prepared to face what was to come. He knew the battles were far from over, But now, by his side, there was love, support, and a newfound determination. He was not just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his family and for a future where the truth would prevail. And that, perhaps, was the greatest achievement of all. John was at a decisive moment in his life. After weeks of anguish and uncertainty, he was finally beginning to understand that the real battle was not only against those who threatened him but also against his internal fears. Each day brought new challenges, but he was determined to face everything head-on. The pressure on his shoulders was immense. He felt as if he were carrying the weight of the world. The investigation he and Jessica had begun had become an exhausting task. They spent hours in front of the computer, sifting through documents and searching for connections that seemed invisible. The fear that something might go wrong always accompanied him, but he knew he couldn't give up, especially now that he had people depending on him. The relationship between John and Jessica had deepened as they faced these adversities together. She was not just his girlfriend, she had become his partner. Every time he looked into her eyes, he saw a strength that inspired him to keep going. Jessica believed in him, and that made all the difference. The trust she placed in him began to reflect in his own self-perception. He started to trust his decisions more and believe that, despite his past mistakes, he could change his future. However, the path was not easy. One day, while reviewing a file, John noticed that something was missing. He felt lost and frustrated. What if we can't uncover anything? What if all of this is in vain? He vented, his voice heavy with despair. Jessica, sensing his insecurity, pulled him close and said, "This is not in vain, John. Every step we take brings us closer to the truth. And no matter what happens, we are together." Those words resonated deeply within him. It was the first time he truly felt he was not alone in this fight. He realized that although the path was filled with challenges, his determination and Jessica's help could guide him. With this new perspective, John decided he needed to act, not just as a solitary fighter, but as part of a team. He began to see his failures as opportunities for growth. With each setback, instead of being defeated, he sought to learn. This didn't mean the pain had disappeared, but he was willing to face reality head-on. The internal transformation he was undergoing was palpable. John began to understand that success was not measured solely in victories or in solving the case surrounding him. It was also about who he was becoming in the process. As he delved deeper into the investigation, he encountered a broader truth. Life was not just about material achievements or external recognition. The connections he formed with Jessica and Michael were more valuable than any prize or success he could achieve. He began to appreciate these relationships and understand that true wealth lay in the trust and love they shared. With each challenge overcome, John gained not only skills but also wisdom. He started to reflect on his experiences and apply the lessons he had learned. The resilience he developed helped him see the world with new eyes. He realized that difficulties were part of the journey and that facing his fears made him stronger. As the days turned into weeks, the friendship between John and Michael also evolved. The brother, who once seemed a distant and conflicting figure, became an essential ally. Together, they discovered they had more in common than they had imagined. This unlikely friendship, born amidst chaos, became one of the keys to John's growth. He learned to value the importance of having someone by his side, someone who also fought for a better future. The road was still uncertain, but John now felt more prepared to face it. He was no longer the man who hesitated to make decisions or who let himself be defeated by fears. He had transformed into someone who, despite adversities, stood up after each fall. Life had taught him that true overcoming came from within, from the ability to confront challenges and rise again, stronger and wiser. And so, with the help of those he loved, John was ready for the next stage of his journey, more determined than ever to seek the truth and protect those dear to him. The night was quiet, but tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. John, Jessica, and Michael were gathered in a dark room, surrounded by papers, documents, and photos they had collected. The investigation had led them to a crucial point, and the revelation they were about to uncover could change everything. Adrenaline coursed through John's veins as he looked at his companions. What was at stake was not just the truth, but also the safety of everyone he loved. "Are we ready for this?" Michael asked, breaking the silence as his gaze shifted from one document to another. John felt the weight of the question. It wasn't just a matter of being ready, it was a test of their courage and determination. He took a deep breath, searching for the strength he had found in the past weeks. "Yes," he replied, with more confidence than he felt. "We have to face this together." Jessica, always by his side, held his hand. "We will uncover the truth and expose those behind this. We are in this together, John." Her words echoed in his mind, offering a comfort he never knew he needed. He smiled faintly, feeling the connection they shared. However, uncertainty still lingered in his heart. As he flipped through the documents, John found a key piece that seemed to fit into a complex puzzle. The name of an informant, someone who might have the answers they were looking for. But at the same time, a sense of danger began to form. The informant was at risk, and he knew he had to act quickly. "We need to find him before it's too late," he said, urgency showing in his voice. The team left the room, and the atmosphere was charged with expectation. They headed to a location indicated by one of the clues, a roadside cafe where the informant was known to meet. The journey felt endless, and John's mind was buzzing with questions and doubts. He recalled his fears, the sleepless nights, and the insecurities that accompanied him. But as he looked at Jessica and Michael, he realized he was not alone. This was his chance to make a difference. When they arrived at the cafe, the scene was tense. The place was empty, except for a man sitting in a corner, nervously looking around. It was the informant. John felt a chill in his stomach, knowing it was time to act. He approached, with Jessica and Michael right behind him. "Are you the informant?" John asked, trying to hide his anxiety. The man looked up, his eyes filled with fear. "Yes, but I don't have much time. They're after me." The urgency in his words made John's heart race. "We need to know who is behind all this. The lives of many people depend on it." The informant glanced around, as if fearing being overheard. "If you want to know the truth, you need to understand that there are powerful forces at play. They won't stop for anything. You need to stay alert." His words echoed in John's mind, bringing forth all his insecurities. Then, suddenly, the cafe door swung open with a bang. John turned and saw familiar figures, but not in a positive context. It was the men he feared, the ones who were after them. His heart raced. "Let's get out of here," he shouted, pulling Jessica and Michael outside. The informant followed them, but they were now in a dangerous game. The trio ran down the street, shadows closing in quickly. John was in survival mode. Every step felt like a challenge. He remembered his failures, the moments he hesitated and felt powerless. But now he had to act. "We can't let them catch us," he shouted, determined to protect those he loved. They split up, each running in different directions but with a plan. The informant had a safe place they could go to. Breathless, John managed to reunite with Jessica and Michael in an alley. Adrenaline pulsed through their veins. "We're going to make it," he said, looking into his friend's eyes. "We need to stick together and believe in each other." With renewed determination, They moved forward, facing whatever was to come. The path was still uncertain, but John now understood that true strength came from within and from the support he found in those around him. By the end of that night, no matter what happened, he had already won his greatest battle, the battle against his fears. And that, in itself, was a victory that would change his life forever. The frantic run through the dark streets seemed endless. John, Jessica, and Michael felt as if they were on an emotional roller coaster. Fear enveloped them, but there was also a new sense of determination. They had faced danger together, and now they needed to find a safe place to recover and plan their next steps. Finally, they arrived at a small apartment that the informant had indicated. It was a simple place, but it had a cozy feel, with a dim light illuminating the space. As soon as they entered, John closed the door behind him and took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. The fear was still there, but something had changed inside him. He felt stronger, more resolute. Jessica, still catching her breath, looked around. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice trembling. John turned to her, seeing the worry etched on her face. "For now, but we need to be quick and careful. They can still find us," he replied, trying to convey confidence. Michael approached the informant, who still looked nervous. "What do you know about them? Who are these people?" he asked, seeking answers. The informant hesitated for a moment, looking out the window as if expecting to see shadows approaching. "They are part of a powerful organization. They don't care who they hurt to achieve their goals. If you're involved, you'll be in constant danger," he explained. John felt a weight in his stomach. The reality of the situation was becoming increasingly clear. "So we can't turn back. We have to expose this," he said, with newfound determination. "We can't let them win." Jessica, always by his side, held his hand. "We're in this together, John. We'll do whatever it takes." The connection between them felt stronger than ever. Deep down, John knew he had to protect those he loved, but he also felt a greater responsibility at play. Over the next few hours, they discussed strategies and analyzed the information they had gathered. Each new detail gave them more clarity about the situation, but also increased the weight of responsibility they felt. John reflected on his journey up to that moment. He had been an ordinary man, living a quiet life without great risks. But now, he was immersed in something much larger than himself, and somehow, that made him feel alive. When dawn arrived, they were exhausted but determined. John stood up and looked out the window. The world outside seemed calm, but he knew that calm could be deceiving. "We need to act cautiously," he said, turning to his friends. "But we can't let this fear paralyze us." Michael nodded. "I never thought we would be involved in something like this. It's scary, but it also brings us together in a way I never imagined." Jessica smiled faintly, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "What if something happens to one of us?" she asked, the vulnerability in her voice echoing in the small apartment. John approached her, holding her hands. "We will take care of each other. I've learned that strength isn't just about being brave. It's about knowing you're not alone. Together, we are stronger." John's words brought a bit of relief to the tense atmosphere. He felt that despite the challenges still to come, he had found something valuable: friendship and loyalty. That night, as they prepared for what was to come, John realized he had changed. He was no longer the man who let fear dictate his choices. He had faced a storm, and instead of being swept away, he had stood firm. The feeling of helplessness that had accompanied him for so long was beginning to dissipate. Now, there was a new purpose in his life. Before going to bed, John looked at Jessica and Michael. "No matter what happens, we will face this together. It doesn't matter what others say or do, "We are a team, and we will fight for the truth." With a nod, they prepared for the long journey ahead, aware that they had already won their greatest battle, the battle against their own fears. John, Jessica, and Michael's journey had transformed them in profound and unexpected ways. As they prepared for the battle ahead, they were no longer just friends but a true family united by adversity. Each of them had faced their own fears and insecurities, and now they were ready to fight not just for their lives, but for the truth that needed to be revealed. In the following days, they became an unstoppable team. John learned to lead with confidence, guiding his friends with determination and empathy. Jessica, with her cleverness, helped gather valuable information, while Michael became a strategist, always thinking one step ahead. Together, they formed a bond that challenged any obstacle that came their way. The first major action they took was to expose the organization that threatened them. Using the information they gathered, they managed to make an anonymous report that caught the authorities' attention. The fear still existed, but it was now replaced by a sense of hope. What once paralyzed them now propelled them forward. As the days went by, the organization began to lose strength. The courage of John and his friends inspired others who had been affected by the same mafia. They realized they were not alone, and many others also stood up to face their oppressors. Their fight became a symbol of resistance, and slowly, the truth began to emerge from the shadows. What had started as a frantic run through dark streets transformed into a journey for justice. John looked at his friends and saw how much they had grown. The scars they carried were not just marks of pain but signs of overcoming. They learned the importance of loyalty and friendship, and each had found a new strength within themselves. After months of struggle, the organization was finally dismantled. A sense of relief and triumph washed over them as the news spread. The path had not been easy, but the lessons they learned were invaluable. John reflected on his transformation. He had gone from being an ordinary man, dominated by fear, to becoming a defender of the truth. He now understood that true wealth did not lie in material possessions, but in the connections we create and the battles we face together. With the organization dismantled, life began to return to normal. John, Jessica, and Michael sat in a cafe, laughing and reminiscing about the difficult moments they had gone through. They realized that despite all the hardships, they had become better people. The friendship they built became the foundation of their lives, and each promised never to forget what they had overcome. The sun was setting on the horizon, lighting the path ahead. John smiled, not just for having won, but for having found the true essence of what it means to live. He knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but now he was certain that together they could face any storm. And so, their story became an inspiration to many. The fight for truth and the strength of friendship echoed in every heart. John made an invitation to all who heard his story: never let fear control you, fight for what you believe in, and value the people around you. If you also have a story of overcoming or a challenge you faced alongside friends, share it in the comments. Your experience can inspire others to find strength in their own paths. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue bringing more stories of transformation and hope. Together, we can make a difference.